Hey Danielle, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this.
Me too. Uh, so where to start, right? Danielle and I are we both have books from the same publisher, and we were introduced by our editor, Kate Zimmerman. So hey Kate, shout out to you. And I think what I found very, very synchronistic and almost like in the collective conscious at the time we were both writing our books is that I wrote a book about manifestation and I have a chapter about shadow work, and you wrote a book about shadow work and you have a chapter on manifestation. So I just felt like, wow, look at the symbiosis right here.
No, it's funny how that wasn't planned. I don't think for the publishers, they didn't ask me to include that. It was something I
Right.
just felt the need to. And I think the same is true of yours, that it just was like the
Yes.
feeling, the energy.
Yes, and actually, like I found the missing link towards manifestation was shadow work. And there's like a whole week about doing that kind of work. And I actually wanted to, I didn't get the copy of your book yet, the hardcover, but I do have a digital copy. So I just want to read a section from your intro, if I may.
Of course.
So first I want to read what you say about shadow work. Shadow work is a book about using the power of the unconscious mind to unlock your potential. The shadow, also known as the unconscious, is a mechanism of the brain designed to repress information that is potentially too intense for the psyche. When it goes unchecked, the shadow builds up continually over time, creating a domino effect of negative consequences within the mind and body. And because this process is unconscious, it's hard to trace the consequences back to the root cause within the shadow. And then a little bit down, you say, after practicing shadow work for several years, I made a discovery. Shadow work is the missing link in the manifestation process. And I was like, I think I wrote the same thing.
We've already known each other without knowing it. We're just sharing thoughts this whole time.
Seriously, I was like, I wonder what it was at that time because we both wrote our books at the same time that we must have been like tapping into the same thing.
Oh, 100%. There was someone, and I'm not going to remember who said this, but someone had mentioned that with thoughts, when we channel, it's sort of like the collective unconscious is
Mhm.
this vast area of information, and it's like you're pulling things down from it at any given time. So if I don't take something and run with it, somebody else is going to. So every once in a while, you have an idea that no one else has done before, and
Mhm.
you're like, oh man, I totally should do something, but I don't really have the time to do that. So I'll wait until
Right.
later. And then 6 months later, someone else did it, and you're like, ah, I
Hmm.
had that idea because we're constantly all channeling from that same pool, that same
Yes.
energy. And we literally wrote these books at the exact same time.
Yes. And I actually wrote about what you just said. So many people have said that very same idea, but mine came from Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, because she had written that as well, that there's like a collective conscious, and she, as a writer, is just tapping into that as well. And she actually gives a story about how she had an idea for a book. And she kind of didn't go with it, and she wrote something else. And like months later, years later, another author wrote the same exact thing. And she was like, "What?"
Like, how is this even possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild how it works, but there's that synchronicity and that symbiosis of like there's certain information that needs to come. And so the universe is going to drop it down,
Mhm.
and whoever picks it up, and we'll put it in a bunch of different people's streams of consciousness. So hopefully somebody runs with it.
Which is, yeah, which is what I think is interesting because we both have, I guess, quote unquote, like scientific, psychological backgrounds. You are a psychotherapist, and I have my degree in psychology. And we also speak about spirituality, and we've both had experience in corporate America. And I think our editor, Kate, really wanted to find that specific kind of person. And we're both speaking to manifestation and shadow work, which kind of are one in the same process. And it came at a time, 2.5 years into the pandemic, and, people starting to talk about trauma and starting to realize like the only thing holding people back from realizing their dreams is to do the inner work, the shadow work. So I do think there's something to be said, even with, our editor coming to that realization. I actually never asked her this, but that this was needed in the collective conscious as well. So like the fact that we both wrote books and then had like similar backgrounds, I think also speaks to that as well.
Well, Kate, if you're listening to this, you have to let us know what was
Yeah.
going on when you picked us, because we need to know.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna ask her. So you go through actually like how you came to shadow work. Do you mind, people are gonna get your book and read about your story and read about shadow work, but do you mind sharing that with us?
Of course. So I've always been spiritual, but over time that was repressed. I come from a family that was very afraid of spirituality because I had a grandmother who was a spiritual healer in the Bronx, where I'm from. And she would heal people. I'd watch them come into the house. She would clip some of their hair and stick it in these crazy little machines. And I don't talk about this in the book. This is an extra thing. And I was fascinated by it. And she would tell my parents all the time I had the same gift that she did. And so they promptly pulled me away from her, moved me out of that house, kept me away from it, and told me facts were everything and nothing else mattered. And from that point on, I just repressed everything I felt, everything I experienced. I buried being bullied in school. I didn't talk to anybody. I had some suicidal attempts. Like everything was just buried and pressed down. And then when I was 29 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer. And that was the moment that everything changed for me. Because I think being faced with mortality in that way and having that experience, it really made the line between realms, the veil, very thin for me, and everything came into view with more clarity than I even thought possible. So that was when I started not only practicing shadow work, but wanting to understand how we get sick in the first place, really understanding that etiology so
Mhm.
that no one would have to experience what I do. And I say this all the time, like not everybody's going to read my book. That's a pipe dream. But if some people do, and it can touch someone's life and it can make them question the things that they're doing and stop them from repressing, then that feels really good.
Yeah. Um, what I was just gonna say too, that was during your Saturn return, which is like, wow, what a Saturn lesson there.
Come on. That was really like I knew Saturn return was gonna be intense, but that feels unfair.
Oh my goodness. Hopefully by now Saturn is giving back, you know? Wow, that must have been very difficult in such a young age. But thank you for sharing that story. Sometimes it takes that to wake us up and actually do the inner work. But something that you mentioned in the book is that these things get repressed, right, over time. That's the definition of shadow. And we don't necessarily know it's happening because it's unconscious. So,
Yes.
as an expert on shadow and shadow work, how can we start to begin to see some of the remnants of our shadow because we can't see, right? So
Right.
how can we start to see some of the evidence of it so we know how to start healing?
The easiest window into our shadow is our triggers. What are the things that push your buttons that don't push other people's? You can see this a lot in friend groups or in relationships. I love relationships as a mirror where something bothers you and your partner is unaffected, or your friend, your sibling. They don't understand why it's hitting a nerve with you. And when that happens, that's a window into your shadow because the trigger is a physiological reaction that stems from the way that you see the world, your brain's neural wiring. And that neural wiring comes from unconscious memories.
Mm-hmm.
When we're young, we see the world in certain ways because of the experiences that we have, and that creates that solid foundation for everything that builds upon it. So no two brains are the same, not even close, like a fingerprint. They can't even possibly come close because no one, not even the people closest to you, not even if you had an identical twin, no one will have the same experiences that you do, which means that your worldview is going to be vastly skewed from those around you. Triggers are awesome in that sense. They're an invitation to understand and look deeper and go, why does that hurt? Why does that bother me? Why is that sitting under my skin in such a weird way? And when you find that, you can start that pathway into shadow work to uncover the why.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting that you mentioned the triggers because my sister and I, obviously, we grew up in the same environment with the same parents, but our triggers are so different. And
Yeah.
I'm always like, why does that even bother you? Gosh, just ignore it, you know?
And she's like, I literally cannot ignore it. This is something I need to address today.
Yeah. What do you say to people that um I hear a lot of, you know, coaches and ex or quote unquote experts. I don't know how expert they are, but with relationships that you manifest toxic people to help you do this kind of work. Like, what do you say about that?
I hate the idea that we manifest anything because I don't think when it comes to negative stuff, because I feel like that's victim blaming
Hmm.
and everyone has different circumstances. Like if you grew up in a home with an abusive parent, you're more likely to end up with an abusive partner. I don't think you're consciously trying to make that happen. I don't think you're trying to bring that forth, but there is an element of that where we repeat what we know. And so
Yeah.
unconsciously, we are inviting in what we know. So if I grew up with abuse and I'm used to being hurt, I'm more likely to have a partner who will do the same. And prior to ending up in shadow work, my background is psychology and cognitive neuroscience, and I became a licensed psychotherapist working for 10 years in that field. And that master's degree that I got was in marriage and family therapy. And so I would see this time and time again with relationships where people would find someone who mirrored their shadow,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
worst parts of ourselves, the triggers, the things that made us feel insecure and sad, we seek out. So I
Yeah.
do think there is an element in that where it's an invitation to heal. But I think it's more likely that we're picking those partners based on expectations, which is why
Hmm.
we often end up with people who resemble mom or dad in terms
Hmm.
of behaviors and personality.
Hmm.
That we have a moment there when we recognize that to choose better or to teach each other. Because if you're in a relationship with someone who's willing to learn and to grow with you, you can take an unfortunate situation and turn it into an amazing one. And I've seen that happen time and time again. It just takes a willingness for both partners to move, which unfortunately doesn't happen as often as I wish.
Yeah. Because also, this whole process takes um, creating space for yourself so you could have awareness. It takes empathy and compassion, well, for yourself first, right? But besides the other person, I feel like
We
second
get
step,
there.
we
Well,
get
because
there. Yeah, but I think the first thing is for ourselves to make that space for ourselves and give ourselves compassion and forgiveness because a lot of the times because we're so running on the shadow, we don't even realize the decisions we're making are from a wounded place.
right.
And so we can victim blame ourselves and say, "Why did you do that?"
Yeah. Or why does this always happen to me?
Yes.
Hear that one all the time. And now, what do you think? Because you're the manifestation expert. Do
Hmm.
you think we call in those people because there's something about us that I know with manifestation, it's like we're accessing the quantum in such a way where when we feel, think, sense, smell, taste, and use all of our senses, we kind of bring stuff forward that we're expecting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I believe that we can't manifest other people's behaviors.
I
I
agree with
think I
that.
think that that is their own thing. I believe we have the opportunity, like you said, to stand up for ourselves and
Hmm.
to break the pattern. So like if you keep manifesting, I'm doing quotation marks, um, the same kind of person, just in different bodies, it's your opportunity to stand up for yourself and walk away and break that cycle and pattern, because that is ultimately like why we go through these lessons and these um, karmic patterns, if you will, is to learn from them and finally heal and integrate the shadow.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it. I don't think
I
so.
know, I feel like it's not the right words. I think there's like
Yeah.
another way that we could put it, and I don't know what the words are yet, but there's something about it. And it kind of rubs me in the same way as saying, like, I grew up really poor, and my family had a very hard time breaking out of poverty, and they still do. Like, financially, my parents both individually pull in a lot more money than they ever have. We didn't have anything when I was young. We lived in my grandparents' attic in the Bronx. And now they make enough money that they're in a tax bracket that they never thought they'd be in. And yet the cycles of poverty still exist, where the money
Mm-hmm.
comes in and it is gone
Mm-hmm.
before it even touch the bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And they put themselves back into debt over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go into the same thought process that we manifest certain things, like we manifest shitty relationships or poverty or whatever, like fill in the blank with anything here, it does get into that victim blaming stance, because I think we don't know what we don't know. And so if you grew up poor, like my mother's family's Jewish, they survived the Holocaust, they came to New York with nothing. They didn't know how to save money. They didn't know how to create
Mm-hmm.
wealth, let alone generational wealth. And that information is gate kept. And
Yes.
rich people know how to stay rich and they know how to make more money.
Mm-hmm.
And poor people are not taught those things. The middle class is not taught those things in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the fault of the poor person to not know those things? Or is it something that we need to be better about disseminating information on? And I think the same thing could go for relationships. We don't know what the red flags for abuse are
Mm-hmm.
until we've seen them, until we understand
Yes.
them.
Yeah.
And before that point, it just feels like home, it just feels
Mm-hmm.
normal.
Wow. I'm so glad you said that, because what I want people to get used to thinking about manifestation is that it's not just an individual thing, but it's a systemic thing.
Yeah.
And the two things that people want to manifest the most are money and relationships, and those are the skills we're not taught. Like we're taught mostly the hard skills, like how to invest. Well, not even that sometimes, but like that information I feel is more readily available. Like if you do want to learn that, there's information that you can buy. It's not free, but the emotional skills, though, we're not taught, like
No.
emotional IQ around money and like healing poverty mindset to go into an abundance mindset, and really learning how to communicate with somebody, like articulating what you want to say without having to control or gaslight the other person. Like we weren't taught those skills. So, of course, we're all fumbling.
Yeah, seriously. There's this couple that when I was doing marriage and family therapy, and I hate that's called marriage and family therapy because I used to work with every kind of relationship, poly, like open relationships, it doesn't matter. So let's just call it relational therapy. There's this couple called the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, who have spent literally thousands of hours studying relationships. And what they do is they hook people up to all kinds of monitors and they stick them in what they call the apartment, and the apartment has cameras all over it and it's mic'd up like crazy, and you're wearing monitors all over your body, but you're doing it for days at a time. So eventually you forget. Like at first it's a little performative and you're like, okay, there's people watching this, and eventually you slip into your normal state. And what they found is that they could tell pretty quickly, like within minutes, which relationships would make it over the long term. We're talking 15, 30 and beyond years, and which ones were about to implode. And it was,
Ooh.
I know it's wild. It's based on a lot of these very, I guess, these learned behaviors that people were just doing naturally, one direction or the other. And so
Mhm.
if you learn that when someone speaks to you, you should turn your head and make eye contact with them and listen without glancing at your phone or like looking at the TV or anything else, your relationship is more likely to survive. But
Mhm.
who taught you that? Is that something that you learned by watching your parents? Is it something you learned somewhere else? Is it information you heard on a podcast? Like
Mhm.
hard to say where the information would come from. Most people don't learn
Right.
those things. And so it's
Right.
hard when we feel unheard and we feel
Hmm.
unsafe in our relationships because our partner is looking off and they're not really making eye
Hmm.
contact. I'm sure you've even seen it in podcast interviews because I
Hmm.
used to have a podcast too where like some people are distracted and
Hmm.
then there's the people who are really engaged. And that's
Yes.
the difference. And it's the little things, these little tiny, tiny things that change relationships.
Hmm.
And the triggers that come from not having those things make it a big impact.
Hmm. One of my triggers, you just reminded me of my trigger.
That's what I'm here for. I'm just here to bring up the shadow.
One of my triggers, and my sister and my family can attest to it, is when I'm speaking to somebody. Um, it doesn't usually happen on Zoom, actually. I have to say, it's usually in person, and I'm speaking, and the other person will interrupt or like completely be doing something else, and like I'll be in mid sentence and they'll like talking to somebody else, or they cut the flow of what I'm saying, and it's so triggering because that makes me feel like they're not present and they're not paying attention to me, which, I grew up with parents who were never present, and I was a latchkey kid, so we were always left on our own, and I felt like I never got the attention of an adult. And so as an adult, I'm like, why can't you focus on me for like 2 minutes as I finish saying this one thought? But
Yeah.
my reaction is to lash out and yell at the person and be like, pay attention.
It's that wounded inner child, right? Like, mommy, like,
Yeah.
see me.
Yeah.
And it's the same trigger. And it's been a huge thing in our relationship because I didn't know that. And I know his mom now, but I didn't know her then. And in our relationship, one of the things that comes up if my business gets in the way, like I'll sometimes have interviews with places late at night because they're located somewhere else, like they're in California, or like tomorrow morning, I'm doing a talk at 6 a.m. New York time for a group in Australia. And it makes him crazy because he feels like I'm pulling attention away from him. And it comes down to that shadow of mommy wasn't there for me.
Hmm.
It's wild how our triggers just sit in our bodies and we
Yes.
all respond differently when it happens.
So does every trigger attach itself to a shadow that you've experienced as a child?
So no, but a lot of them do. I think there's four facets to shadow work. And those four facets for me are an inner child. That's a huge one because a lot of our brain's neural pathways create themselves during that period of time. So a ton
Hmm.
come from them. There's ancestral wounds.
Hmm.
So the whole field of epigenetics and how certain biological information is passed down from one generation to the next through our blood. Then there is womb healing, which is not specific to women, even though it sounds like it would be. It just has to do with that energetic center. The women tend to have a lot of issues that come up with that. And it could be around dating relationships. It could be about around creation of things like the creation of a business course or a relationship or a child. Doesn't matter what it is. And then the last one, my favorite, is past lives because
Hmm.
we hold that information and it stays within us. And a lot of the time, when we think we know the core of something, it goes back to a past life. So it's even deeper than you think.
That's so cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah, because now I'm just thinking of all the triggers. I'm like, ooh, is that a past life? Probably.
Oh, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, we've lived so many times.
Yes.
And even now, like I'm in my mid 30s, like I have a ton of shit from this life. And
Hmm.
I've dealt with most of it. I know that it's there. It's taken me a lot of time. What if we multiply that by 1,000? And now I've got
Hmm.
1,000 different things that I have to deal with, or by 100,000. I have no idea what's back there. Or if I had
Hmm.
lives that were particularly horrific, there's one I talk about in the book, a past life that I had in Scotland, where I was basically like a creepy witch living in the woods by
Hmm.
myself. And there's so much trauma that I had to deal with in that life. Oh my, and my husband will bring it up too. He's like, yeah, like you're being that creepy witch again. Because when
Hmm.
I do that, I isolate, I pull back from people. I was a loner. I don't lean on others for support. So when I get stressed out, my coping mechanism is to like creep off into the woods. And he has to kind of
Hmm.
pull me back and be like, you're not there anymore. It's not the 1600s. Get back
Hmm.
out here. wild.
Yeah. So after we acknowledge our trigger and we know that maybe that's tied to a shadow, besides reading your book, how can somebody like go through this process?
hmm For me, what we want to do is interrupt something called the subconscious feedback loop. This is an internal mechanism that we all have where we're basically breaking down how our memories are created. So our brains, bodies, and energy are all tied together through this process where we experience something. That experience create a chemical reaction in the brain, which is your emotions. That chemical reaction sends a message down through your spine to your body about what needs to happen. Where does blood need to go? Where does oxygen need to go? Where are we pulling it away from? And then that creates another chemical reaction in your gut, and the enteric nervous system sends a thought up to your brain. We think thoughts happen in your head. They don't. They
Hmm.
happen in your gut.
Hmm.
And that loop repeats itself because those thoughts that were created in your gut reinforce the initial experience. So if you feel like, um, let's stick with the same example we were using before of my husband and feeling like his mom wasn't there. His dad was not in the picture. His mom was a full-time working mom. She worked till pretty late. She didn't have a car. She had to take public transit home in Philadelphia. So she would get home pretty late and he'd be on his own from a very young age. So the first experience, let's say it was getting out of school in first grade and having to walk home by himself, and he forgets which way it is to his house because he's literally 6 years old.
Mm.
He goes the wrong way and he's stuck wandering the streets of Philly and he starts to feel scared. So the experience is I don't know where I am, looking around, taking in all the senses, smelling the cheesesteaks in the air because it's Philly, all the senses. The emotional reaction then is fear. And that's one of our primary emotions. We feel it before the age of 7. That fear triggers adrenaline and cortisol to course through the body, which causes blood and oxygen to flow away from the internal organs to the extremities so that he could fight or run or freeze or whatever it is that he's going to do in that moment. And let's say he freezes and he just panics, he shuts down, and he sits on the street and he waits. And in that moment, the thought is, I'm alone. And now, anytime as an adult that he feels alone, that whole reaction is going to reinforce itself. Even smelling a cheesesteak in the air might trigger that response. It
Mm.
doesn't matter what it is, anything that recreates even a microcosm of that initial experience. So, what anybody who's listening to this can do is start to figure out what that subconscious feedback loop is for you. If you can get as far back to the root cause of whatever it is that is triggering you as possible, you can start to think about all those pieces and you can interrupt the subconscious feedback loop. The easiest way to do that is through your breath because our breath will stop the flow of fight or flight. It'll stop the
Mhm.
adrenaline and cortisol from pumping. So if you think about the worst thing you can remember, like the absolute worst thing you can recall, and as you're thinking about it and you're seeing the experience like you would if you were trying to manifest something, all the senses.
Mhm.
How does it smell? How does it taste? What's the sensory stuff around touch? What does it look like? What are the details, the colors? Bring as much of it back as you can. But this time you're going to breathe really slowly in through the nose and out through the mouth. You can use box breathing as a
Mm.
technique where you breathe in for 4, hold 4 at the top, breathe out for 4, hold that for 4. If you repeat that until your body relaxes and you're not in fight or flight anymore, what you're doing is breaking down how it exists in your memories. You're
Mhm.
changing your brain, you're changing your emotions, you're changing your energy, you're changing your body. And that will stop it from triggering you next time. Because now, if something triggers you, your body and your mind have two options. Do we take the old route or do we take the new one? And
Mhm.
if you can just keep taking the new one, the old one doesn't have to exist anymore.
Mm. Wow. I love all of that, what you said. That's so beautiful. And it
Thanks.
is so amazing how sometimes you just need to breathe to remind your body that you're in the present moment and that you're not traveling back to the past. And you can be, feeling safe within your body because a lot of the times, one of my teachers, Resma Menakim, he is a somatic trauma healer, and he says, respect the protect. Like, again, this goes with forgiveness and empathy. You were just protecting yourself. And so as an adult, our trigger responses are our body's way of protection. So even in that, there's like a space for love and um, compassion for yourself.
Absolutely. I love that. And we can have so much gratitude for the things that kept us safe in the past. If our
Mhm.
bodies didn't respond this way, we would be a wreck as adults. We wouldn't be able to function. This
Mhm.
is a protective mechanism of the mind and the body, but we don't have to hold it forever. We can give it space, we can give it grace, we can be in gratitude for all of it, and we can find a way to let it go.
Exactly. And really, when people ask me, which I don't think is a good question, but they always ask me, what's the quickest way to manifest? And I'm like,
Oh,
oh, oh.
goodbye. What?
We,
Everybody always goes there. It's a
everybody always wants the quick fix. And I'm like, you're not going to like my answer then. Um, but my answer to that is to do the shadow work, is to do the inner work of what's holding you back from manifesting. Because people are so tunnel visioned in what they want and not looking at what's holding it back. Like
Mhm.
they're not like reverse engineering, like if I'll just give myself as an example, I want to be in a long-term committed partnership. I think that's one of our greatest um, like gifts as humans is to love and to be in a partnership. But what was holding me back and what made me scared all the time was this feeling of being trapped and feeling, like a bird in a cage.
You're Sagittarius in your chart.
I'm a Sag rising, so
There we
like,
go. Same. I feel
yes,
the same way all the time, even in
yeah.
a relationship.
Yeah, and just the way that I grew up and being a survivor of domestic violence, and being so young, I always felt trapped because I was at the whim of adults that, I couldn't liberate myself. So once I did the shadow work and I'm still continually to unravel that, and realize like why I felt that way and where that came from and started integrating that fear, then really like my body feels it doesn't feel triggered in the way that it used to. So really, I guess what I'm trying to say is do the shadow work.
It's true. Everybody always wants a quick fix. Everybody wants things to be fast and easy and like our social media lives, like 30-second videos that give me all the answers about life.
Mhm.
But I think the beautiful part of manifestation is the journey that
Mhm.
you get to look back and kind of go, wow, I had this happen for myself. And I can't even believe that I'm here because it feels so good to be in this new space after having gone on this crazy journey that took me there. If
Mhm.
we got it immediately, I don't know if it would have that same weight. It would feel surprising. It'd be
Mhm.
interesting to like instantly manifest. And there are some things I've manifested very quickly. Like I talk about in shadow work, how I manifested that book deal.
Mhm.
And it was literally just a few weeks of that process, but the years of shadow work that led up to it, the
Yeah.
feelings that brought me to that place of worthiness where I can feel it in my body and go, no, I'm ready to share this stuff. I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Mhm. So share your story of how you manifested it.
I will absolutely do that. I love this story because it's wild. Social media is funny how like we can meet people from everywhere and you create these relationships. So right at the beginning of the pandemic, I wanted to offer just a space for people to really feel everything, whether it was like intense grief or to feel like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. So I created what I call the spiritual alchemy masterclass. And I brought in 6 healers that I really respected and I trusted and I knew would give people the ability to have both that really deep heaviness and also that light at the end of the tunnel. And I was looking for someone to do Akashic Records too, because I had my 6 and I felt really good with them. I needed a 7th and I wanted Akashic Records. I couldn't tell you why. I just knew I had to have it. So I just kind of put it up to the universe and said, if the right person exists, let them fall into my lap, let it be easy. and I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to let it be. And this woman, Rebecca Lyons, who's in the UK, just popped up on my For You page within minutes. And I'd never seen her stuff before. She had like basically no following. I didn't know anything about her, but she read the Akashic Records, connected with her. She did it. She's amazing. I obviously talked with her first and made sure that she was legit. She's fantastic. And a few months later, I was like, I really want to have a full session with you. I want to sit down and do the whole damn thing. She didn't know anything about me other than social media, and I share a limited portion of my life. And when we had the session, she said, "You're going to be an author." And I said, "Bullshit. I literally didn't get my PhD because I don't feel like writing a dissertation. My master's thesis was enough. I'm good. If I never put another word down on paper, I'm good." And she was like, "No, seriously, like, you don't have to choose this path, but like all the paths that your Akashic lords are outlining for me are you as an author. And it's not a matter of if, but of when." So I was like, okay, whatever, like that's not going to happen, but sure. And she said, "You're going to have a journal." And I said, "Great, I'll buy one." She said the word journal's on the front. So I was like, okay, whatever.
Mhm.
So I went and I bought a journal. I literally have it here, like the cheesiest thing I could find at like a local store, because I
Mhm.
wanted to buy it from somewhere that I was like, at least I'm buying it from somewhere good. So it's journal right on the front. I start writing in it. I hated every second of it. Like I just felt like it was so stupid. And I let it go. And like a year later, I was channeling through one day that I wanted to write down shadow work prompts. So I took a day and I made the Shadow Seekers journal and I put it on Amazon KDP and was like, whatever. And it ended up blowing up and becoming like their top selling shadow work journal. And she messaged me and said, "Oh, it looks like you started with the journal." And I
Mhm.
didn't even put two and two together. I
Mhm.
thought this was the journal and I was just going to
Mhm.
write in it. So when that happened, I was like, okay, like maybe I am meant to write. I don't know. So I just told myself, let me meditate on it for a couple days and see what happens. So for I think 1 to 2 weeks, every day that I meditated, I manifested it. I just envisioned what it would be like to be able to touch people's lives with shadow work and to have that information help other people and to see the impact it would have on their life, to be able to prevent illness, to be able to get to the root cause of the things that were bothering them. I could see the people and that domino effect. And then Kate called me, and that was it. And
Mhm.
actually, within that week, I got two other offers from other publishing houses as well. But obviously,
Mhm.
I went with Sterling Ethos at the end.
Mhm.
They just felt at the time like it was the best fit.
Yeah. And you were also featured in the New York Times.
I was right
Yeah.
before that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's how Kate said that she found me, was through
Mhm.
that article. And Shape
Mhm.
Magazine, I did an article for them too about shadow work not too long before.
Mhm.
So I think that's how she said. And I think those other people as well all said that they found me that way, which is funny because those things also just kind of fell into my lap. But I'm telling you, things didn't fall into my lap until shadow work. Everything
Mhm.
before shadow work was a fight. It was an uphill climb where it felt like I was losing constantly.
Yeah.
And then with shadow work, it just
Yeah.
everything became kind of easy. I don't,
Isn't that so wild how that happens? Like, people
yeah,
always ask me, what is my purpose? And I say, you'll know when people start resonating with something that you're saying, and it's almost like then you go down that route, you know? And honestly, I never thought I would write a book about manifestation because I was like, who am I to write that book, you know? But that just happened to be the way in which it wanted to move through me. But
I love that idea that you just said about how it resonates with other people because I think that
yeah.
self-centeredness part of us as humans, we're always
Hmm.
like, what's going to feel good for me? But I do
Hmm.
think there's a huge piece of it that's like, how do I have an impact on others? How do I help
Yes.
others feel good? And
Yeah.
cool.
Well, so I have like in front of me I have a cork board that basically reminds me of how to be a human.
I want to see this later. Please take a picture of this and
I
send it.
will, I'll send it to you. But it says all you have to do is to add value, to be of service, and to help people through your art and your story. That's
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
Like
I got goosebumps.
you don't have to like overcomplicate things. Just add value, help people, be of service using your art and your story. And so that's why like I just share about everything, and then what people resonate with or what people because the people who will go to you resonate with you. And that's kind of where then you like, no, this is like where I'm supposed to channel that energy.
Yeah, I think there's so much pressure on us, especially with things like social media, where it's like you have to have a shtick, you have to have
Mm-hmm.
some kind of thing that you're all
Hmm.
about. And if you don't find what that narrow, tiny little window is, then people are
Yeah.
going to pass you by. And that pressure is insane because I don't
Yeah.
think anyone is like that. I think we're all really multifaceted. I think,
I was just gonna say that I don't resonate with a niche. And like, if you
yeah,
follow me on TikTok, I talk about Game of Thrones and
hell,
I talk about astrology and books and gardening and then like decolonization. Like, I talk about everything.
yeah. And yet, the things that really strike a nerve with people are the things they pay attention to. Like, I
Right.
love your decolonization content because
Mhm.
that for me is really, it's powerful and it's important. And it feels like that just strikes a chord with me so much. So you don't know
Yes.
how you're going to resonate with somebody. You don't
Exactly.
know where it's going to hit, and you won't know
Mhm.
unless you try.
Yeah, and I also think that it's because of your own personal experience with the topic. Like you understand shadow work because you became sick and you wanted to see the root cause of your illness.
Right.
And who else better to talk about decolonization than a woman of culture who's like affected by it the most, you know? And I think that is why it almost resonates more because you yourself have experience.
Hmm. This is funny. When I was becoming a therapist and we were all like 20 something, we didn't know anything about the world. And I asked a question one day to one of our professors, and I said, who is going to take us seriously? Like, who is going to come in after 50 years of marriage and be like, let me let this 23-year-old handle this? Or someone who is going through cancer treatment or horrific infertility and go, let me let this 23-year-old solve all this. And that person looked back at me and said, you don't have to go through it to know how to help. And I just always felt like that was bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, I knew I could sit there with those people and I could hold space for them, but I could never truly empathize with what it is that they were going through because I haven't walked in their shoes. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge part of the reason why shadow work just feels better for me than doing traditional therapy because you don't know. And when I was going through cancer, I didn't have as many people as I do now who understood, and I still seek those people out because they get it. They've been
Mm-hmm.
there, they know it. Until you've walked it, you don't know.
You don't know. And sometimes, like, there's controversy whether or not you manifest your certain situations, but I personally come from the belief that we write our own birth charts and like the way we navigate through this world. And I 100% believe that some of our biggest challenges are the ones that we're going to help people walk through because we can literally walk hand in hand with them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's powerful that we're able to do that because I think not everybody, when they've gone through it, like when I was feeling really low, I was in no position to walk anybody through anything. And
Mhm.
having someone who could have been there for me in that moment would have been a game changer. And when I found my mentor, Allison Kelsey, who I talk about in the book, that really was a moment where everything shifted, just to have someone who understood because she'd
Yeah.
been through it before, because
Mhm.
she'd walked a similar path. She got it in a way that other people wouldn't have.
Mhm. So, just as with somebody with your background and now have written a book about shadow work, and you see on social media and, Instagram and TikTok is, like you said, this like clickbait, 30 seconds to get your attention.
Yeah.
And I've just noticed in the past 2 years a lot of talk about trauma because obviously we're all going through collective trauma right now on like a massive scale, and we always have, but this is a buzzword now. And I'm not one to like dictate what is trauma for one person versus the other, but in your personal opinion, or not a personal, but like expert opinion, like some of this trauma sounds like just life adversity that we all go through, like being bullied, right? Like I feel like most of us have been bullied. Um, is it traumatic? Yes, but I feel like that's normal life adversity
Yeah.
versus like what your parents and grandparents and your ancestors went through. Like that's big T trauma, in my opinion. So can you speak to that? Like, how can we start to distinguish that?
Yeah, there's specific markers for what dictates big T versus little t trauma and also life adversity. They're sort of like three tiers. And now that we speak about it, I kind of wish I would have included life adversity in the book because I do think it clarifies a lot. In fact, when I was editing my book, and I've told you this story before, when I gave examples of little t trauma, the people who were editing the book came back and said, that sounds like big T. And I said, no, that's absolutely little t. And here's the criteria for why it falls there.
Hmm.
Anything less than that is life adversity. It's not actually trauma.
Hmm.
They fought me a little bit on it, but I had to pull examples. I had to show them the literature that says the exact definitions of. So, big T trauma is anything that is so horrific for our nervous system that it causes us to have very long term issues. We're talking 6 months plus of things like flashbacks and like a full body experiences like panic attacks. If it's not that big, and the things that fall into that criteria are things like finding a parent dead on the floor, like something really awful,
Hmm.
losing a child very young, or like losing them during childbirth, horrific childbirth experiences. Those are big T traumas. War,
Hmm.
immigration. There's big things that people go through. Little t traumas are still horrific for the body, but they're not causing those symptoms. They're not causing the PTSD that we would see with a big T trauma. Now, it's still overwhelming for the body, and we might see some smaller bits of that, like intense triggers that cause us to start in the direction of a panic attack, but we're able to reel it back, or it's for a more acute period of time, less than 6 months. It has to go over 6 months to qualify as a big T. Life adversity is normal and actually really healthy for all of us to go through. We are meant to have a healthy level of struggle. This is a weird one, but bear with me on this. When children are born vaginally,
Hmm.
it is a very traumatic event.
Hmm.
They literally have their noses so smushed in the vaginal canal that they're getting next to no air as they wiggle through this tiny space where their shoulders are dislocated and their
Hmm.
brain is smushed up with all the fontanelle, those like pieces of the skull fractured on top of each other. It's very painful and it's very awful, and they're terrified after being in a squishy little water ball for 9 months. It's meant to be, because all the trauma that they experience on the way out actually helps their nervous system regulate. It gives them
Hmm.
a level of resilience. So when they face trauma after they're born, it doesn't hurt them as much. It doesn't
Hmm.
create as much instability in their nervous system. That's life adversity. And things that feel horrible, like getting bullied. I was bullied so many times. And I think I told you the story too. As someone who was Jewish when I was young, growing up in New York, people had very strong opinions about Jewish people. And I would hear kids talking about how horrible Jews were. And I was sitting right there. And I would shut down. It would make me freak out. My heart would start to race. Like, what if they know? What if they know that I am? What if they want to hurt me? And
Hmm.
those feelings, they cause your body to freak out. That's life adversity, because we have moments like that that alter our nervous system temporarily. They might cause some shadow where now I'm going to feel less likely to share that bit of information about me. I'm going to feel like people don't like me. I'm going to feel like I need to hide, but it's not so intense that it's stopping me from being able to show up as myself in some way. Life adversity is normal and it sucks a lot of the time, but it's normal, and it does build a level of resilience and grit in all of us, and we need it. We
Hmm.
can't live trauma free. It would make us a mess.
Right. But it seems like, at least with American culture, that we're not building up resilience.
No, we're doing the opposite. We're doing the exact opposite. I can even see it with myself and my little brother. I hope he never listens to this, but he's 10 years younger than me and he lacks resilience and he has no grit. And he's gone through probably way more than I have. He has ulcerative colitis. He's constantly dealing with medical issues, but at the quickest sign of adversity, he's like, "Yep, I'm done with that." He'll quit his job. He'll move
Mm-hmm.
back home. He'll
Hmm.
let mommy take care of him. And that has so much to do with the way that we're raised, because I had a different mother 10 years before that.
Mhm.
Not literally, she was just a different person 10
Mhm.
years before. And the more that we coddle kids and adults, the more that we make life easy for them and take away that life adversity, the worse we make it. And it's
Yeah.
wild how that happens. Like, we want to make this world a better place. I don't want
Yes.
kids to go to school and get bullied. It would
Mhm.
break my heart. And yet, from a trauma perspective, I hope they have a healthy level of discomfort throughout their
Yeah.
lives, because it will make them stronger. It'll
Mhm.
make them better people because they'll have more empathy for others.
Right. And also, I feel like we're Americans, right? Like a little humbleness would be
Go a long
okay.
way.
Yeah. Like remind ourselves that we're human and we're not, coming from an egoic, narcissistic place.
Which is very hard for us in our individualistic culture.
Yes. This was so interesting. Like just out of my own curiosity, what are you manifesting now? And you're so in tune with yourself. Like, what is the shadow that you believe is like holding you back?
Oh, this is an easy one for me. So right now, and I'm always dealing with my shadows. I'm like, bring up the crap.
I know.
I host this huge conference every year in Philadelphia called Selfish Philly. Long term, I wanted to be selfish, insert the name of anywhere here. Selfish New York, selfish Omaha. I don't care, because the whole conference is centered around the idea of preventative medicine, all the things that I needed when I was going through my cancer journey. So bringing the idea that it is not only okay, but very healthy for us to take care of ourselves, and bringing all the best resources in the area into one place so that you know exactly who your resources are in the moments where you need them the most. So with that conference coming, my big shadow is money, because financially,
Mm-hmm.
this is another up level for me, where putting on a conference of this scale costs tens of thousands of dollars. And I just have to hope that I make it back. And I've done it more than once, but every time it's that feeling of like, oh gosh, did I just do it again? Like, here we go. And it brings up all that poverty stuff that I was talking about,
Yes.
feelings that I have from earlier of like, am I just like my parents? Do I
Mm-hmm.
just throw money away and not understand how to create wealth?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I doing something that's really going to invest in a community that has taken care of me and saved my life in a lot of different ways?
Mm-hmm.
And will that be something that I can manifest and create sustainably for the long term?
Mm-hmm. Money is such a big one.
Yeah.
That shadow, that poverty shadow is real.
It's big, and
It's
a
so
lot
big.
of it. Yeah, it's
And
huge.
I see it play out even in wealthy people because I used to work in finance in New York City and I tell people all the time that they were some of the richest people, but the like poverty mindset.
Yes. This is a weird thing, but I used to, as a therapist, be pretty close to a very prestigious business school in the
Mhm.
country. And you could probably guess which one, considering where I was located in Philly. And students would come to me on mommy and daddy's dime, and they became some of my favorite clients that I ever had, because holding up a mirror for them was fascinating, because nobody had really done it before. But especially the women, they were definitely more in tune with themselves and their shadows. And they would constantly have all these fears of like, well, this person is so much more able to drop in. They know the CEO of Google, so they're getting a job handed to them, and everybody's going for a trip to Dubai, and like, I can't afford to go, and they're flying a private jet. I was like, oh my God, these problems that exist for you, if I said them out loud anywhere else, it's like, F you, because
Hmm.
that's not a problem. And for them, they were feeling these burdens so heavily of trying to keep up with their peers and feeling like they were in lack when they
Hmm.
had everything.
Hmm. Wow, mic drop.
I'd be sitting there like, I don't understand your problems. Like, I remember being a kid
Yeah.
and being like, I don't know if I can have lunch and dinner today. Like,
Hmm.
this, like, just a different world from what I,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. And scarcity exists no matter where you are.
No matter how much money you have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I have a couple of last questions before I let you go because you did write a book and it's something that you manifested. So how was that process for you?
When I manifest, just like you, the most important thing is the shadow work first. I need to understand the limitations, the things that will hold me back, because that
Mhm.
energetic weight will stop me from being able to bring anything into my worldview. So shadow work comes first after I identify what it is that I want. And then the process for me looks like really understanding exactly what it's going to feel like at least 6 months down the line from already
Mhm.
having it. Like,
Mhm.
it's not like I'm feeling what it felt like to just receive it. Like, here you go, it's yours. I want to know what it feels like to already be living it for so long that it now feels like the new norm.
Mhm.
That's the space that I go to in my meditations where it
Mm.
already happened. It's been mine for a while. I've already created comfort around it, and I have so much gratitude for how it's changed things.
Mm.
I hold that with me every time that I meditate. And when
Mhm.
I make decisions, like even with this conference, I'll make decisions. I'll spend the money knowing what it feels like 6 months down the line. Because
Mhm.
afterwards, that feeling, then knowing what it feels like, the impact it created on the community,
Mhm.
how it feels in my body makes me know what it takes to get there. And then
Mhm.
I'll make decisions because I
Mhm.
feel like aligned action is something we don't talk about enough with
Mhm.
manifestation, which is why I love your book and how
Mhm.
everything is a process week by week of really being
Mhm.
accountable to yourself. Taking the aligned action is so necessary. You
Yeah.
can't envision having this beautiful house
Mhm.
in the woods with like all like the bells and whistles and the big windows in the back. And then when someone goes, hey, like there's this new development popping up, want to go check it out with me? And be like, no,
I know.
you have to go.
Yeah.
You have to do the thing. Like if
Yeah.
you're manifesting more money and then an opportunity shows up at your current job that you don't want to stay at, but you're not manifesting a new job, you're manifesting money, take the new position at your job
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
get more clear on your manifestations.
Mhm.
Aligned action is so key, right?
It's everything.
It's everything.
It's everything. It's literally like your ideas in action form, you know, the decisions you make and how you behave and how you show up. It's literally everything. And that's why I think a lot of people don't um manifest more because they're afraid. And when you're afraid, that's the shadow work you have to do. Like,
Yep.
why am I afraid?
Yeah. I was just on the phone with a client right before we started, and she's someone who did shadow work with me a year ago. And I love staying in touch with all the people who come through. Like, you're stuck with me for life. If you do shadow work with me, I'll always be in your corner.
Mhm.
And she was crying about a, she's like on the precipice of having everything she ever wanted as a death doula. And she's afraid to hit go on it. Like, it's
Mm.
done, like
Mhm.
everything's ready to roll out, and she's afraid to hit go. And my advice to her was, when was the last time you did shadow work? Is it time to go back and address those fears so that you can comfortably take that step? Because
Mhm.
that step is the moment when everything changes and you don't need anything holding you back.
Yeah. I love that too because I tell people that fear and grief, they're always like in simmering somewhere in the
Yeah.
background. And sometimes it's never going to go away until you keep stepping forward towards it and realize like it's kind of there, but you know how to work with it while it's there. And that's why I don't believe in fearless because we're never going to be fearless. Fear is part of our reality because it helps us keeps us safe. But being paralyzed by it, it's not helpful at all.
No, the way that I've always viewed it, and this is weird, but bear with me, is grief and fear are never going to get smaller. You're always
Hmm.
probably going to feel them about the same. But what
Hmm.
can change is your perspective. How far
Hmm.
away from them can you get so you can turn around and see it with a different view?
Mm. I love that. Yes. And with time, like with grief, it gets more manageable.
Hmm. But the more you walk down that path,
Hmm.
the quicker it becomes more manageable. It doesn't become so overwhelming. And that's why I
Yeah.
have a grief panel in Selfish Philly, because I think
Hmm.
this is a shadow that we don't talk about enough. We're not taught how to
Hmm.
grieve, not taught how to hold space for our own emotions and our
Hmm.
sadness, anger, and all the things that come up, because you could feel everything with grief all at the same time.
Yes. Okay, so this is the last because you brought up grief, and it just reminds me of the passing of the Queen recently and how it's so polarizing because some people are like, um, obviously mourning, and then other people are celebrating because she symbolized hundreds and hundreds of years of genocide
Yeah.
and horrible things. I would consider them to be war crimes, but in some ways that's grieving too because they're grieving something that she symbolized.
Yes.
And
And the
so it
loss that came with her reign.
right. And so it's not for us to judge like how, because like you said, grief is so multifaceted. It's not just crying. It could be resentment, it could be anger, it could be fear in there, like all wrapped up under the umbrella of grief.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's wild how like people have felt all these things about her, good, bad, or otherwise, for a very long time.
Hmm.
But this is the moment where it's finding its way out, I think, because it's
Yes.
grief in some way,
Right.
like the loss someone feels. Like take the diamond that was in her crown. I can't
Hmm.
think of the diamond right now, but
Hmm.
there's this huge controversy over does it go back to
Hmm.
the countries that it was stolen from?
Hmm.
Or does it stay with England, even though I think that's bullshit, but that's my personal opinion.
Hmm.
So the grief that comes out with that isn't just about a diamond. It was never
Hmm.
about a diamond. It's about
Hmm.
the loss of things that were taken away from people for a very long time, the anger that people have over the colonization of
Hmm.
their countries, their ways. It's gonna hit everyone different depending on how they felt. And we could say it about any loss, the loss of a job that you hate, the loss of a parent that you had a complicated relationship with, an ex that was abusive to you. But
Hmm.
if you lose them, you might feel some weird things.
Hmm.
Grief is weird in that it just brings up all the shadow, whatever emotions that haven't been dealt with, whatever reactions in the body, wherever it's been stuck. It's
Hmm.
just a moment where it comes to the surface.
Yeah.
And for me, that's always an invitation to go, okay, it's at the surface now. I can deal with it,
Hmm.
or I can find a way to push it back down. But that's up
Hmm.
to me.
Mm. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
What is your hope for people and your platform about shadow work?
My hope, my deepest, sincerest hope in like my bones is that at least one person reads it and does the work. And in the long term, what that'll do is stop them from getting sick because
Mhm.
everything comes back to the feeling that I had after my last cancer surgery when I woke up and felt the most horrific pain I'd ever felt in my life. And I've had two kids. Like that was nothing. Childbirth was nothing compared to the pain that I felt after my last cancer surgery. And I just want to make sure that people know that they have options, that we don't have to just live in a way where life happens to us, but it can happen for us, and that we have more control than we think. So
Mhm.
I hope that it reaches a lot of people. I'd be grateful if it reaches a few that it can impact.
In the words of Yuna Chung, my mother, think bigger than that. she's, she's like, you're thinking too small. She's like, no, you have to think bigger.
That's why you wrote the manifestation book. Thank you, Yuna. No, I do. I sincerely hope it
Yeah.
impacts so many people, and I see that manifestation. But
Mhm.
honestly, like if it does nothing and the book goes nowhere and I helped one person, that's
Mhm.
gonna feel so good for me because I
Yeah.
never ever want anyone to go through the pain that I went through. And like
Yeah.
we keep talking about over and over, I wouldn't want to take away everybody's pain, and I wouldn't want to take away those moments of resilience and grit that can
Mhm.
be formed in the traumas, but
Yes.
I wouldn't wish that on anybody. That sucks.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, shadow work changed my life. And I know it can change the lives of a
Mhm.
lot of other people too.
Well, the fact that it's 2022 in my lifetime, there's a book called Shadow Work. That's just amazing that this
Yay.
this this is out there. And
Mhm.
so with your book and you also see clients and you have a conference coming up, speak more about how you people can work with you.
Yeah. So I have my shadow work course called the Create Your Light Academy. And I called it that because shadow work is not just about being in the darkness. It really is about creating that resilience and that grit and learning how to take control and empower yourself. So I run that group quarterly and I keep the group small because the experience is very intimate. but I do like them in a group setting because there's so much healing that can happen collectively when you have that group of people who are standing with you and holding your hand for that experience. It's unlike anything else in the world. The next round is going to be starting sometime around the end of November, beginning of December. We already have a few people enrolled in that one. So if it's something you're interested in, definitely reach out. We have the Selfish Philly Conference that happens every year. This year it's going to be happening on October 2nd. So depending on when you're listening to it, this might be something for 2023. But that conference is centered around giving yourself all of the resources possible to be able to heal. That comes from the keynote speakers. We have doctors coming in to talk about biohacking your health and how to alter your own physiology. We're going to have people who are coming on a grief panel to speak about grief. We have a womb panel to talk about the specific issues that women face and the traumas that they might incur and how to heal. There's going to be talks about letting the somatic stuff take over, where you really physically let trauma move out of the body in those ways. Exhale Spa, which is a national brand, is sponsoring a VIP area. So everybody gets all free spa services during the conference, free wash off facials, free skin analysis, free dosha readings, free oxygen bar, massages, acupuncture, Reiki. It's all going to be involved. Plus the best health and wellness professionals in the Philly area. And hopefully by the time you're listening to this, this becomes something that is hitting cities all over the country and the world, because we're dreaming bigger, like your mom says.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I am so in love with the different pieces of work that I do. Every one of them has my heart in a different way. And it's such a manifesting generator thing of me to have so many different pockets. Like I have Create Your Light Academy. I have Radiate Your Light, which is a follow-up for the Create Your Light people. I have a book course that's coming out that I'll make the formal announcement at next week. But since this isn't being posted today, I'll tell you here, I have a book course. And I have my actual book, Shadow Work, that you can pick up at hopefully Barnes and Nobles, but definitely online and on Amazon. The Selfish Philly Conference, and also my Holistic Healing Center, the Wellness Collective, that has holistic healing services that you can access from home, including a whole database of free yoga classes. We've always held them for free on Saturdays. Our current yoga teacher's out on maternity leave right now, but she'll be back soon once her and her baby are all settled in and good to go and she's fully healed. So all those are still in reserve on our Facebook group. You can do literally 2 years worth of yoga classes and never repeat a class because they're all on there for free.
Wow, you heard it here. Lots of resources. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. This was such an enlightening conversation, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with the world.
Thanks for having me. I always love listening to you and having conversations with you. And again, just super grateful that we met.
Yes. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.